Seth Rollins shocks Roman Reigns with WWE return after injury. The architect is back, and he's coming straight for the tribal chief. In this explosive episode, Seth Rollins makes his dramatic return to WWE after a grueling knee injury that left fans questioning if he'd ever step into the ring again. But he's not just here to smile and wave, he storms back with fire in his eyes and a message for Roman Reigns. What happens when two titans of WWE collide once again? Tension erupts, history is revisited, and the road to WrestleMania may have just been rewritten. What if I told you? The very man Roman Reigns once called a brother has returned not with forgiveness, but with fury? What if I told you that Seth Rollins didn't just survive a career-threatening injury, he used it to build a war chest of pain, rage, and unfinished business? And what if I told you that in one single moment, the entire WWE landscape was shaken? Not by a chair shot, not by a championship match, but by a stare? That's right. Seth Rollins is back. And this time, he's not dancing. This is not a comeback built on cheers and welcome home chants. This is a calculated storm. This is vengeance wearing a smirk. Because behind that trademark black gear, behind that twisted grin, is a man who has waited, watched, planned. A man who has watched Roman Reigns climb the mountain, sit on the throne, and erase every ally and enemy that stood in his way. Until now. Until he came back. But to truly understand why this return means more than just another feud, more than just a chapter in WWE storytelling, you have to go back. Back to the moment everything broke. It wasn't in the ring. It wasn't on the microphone. It was in the silence, when Rollins collapsed during a live event, clutching his knee, screaming in agony, and for a brief moment, the world stopped cheering. Let me take you back. It was February 2025. A cold night in Chicago. A non-televised WWE event that should have been routine. The crowd was hot. Rollins was red hot, blazing through the roster like the workhorse he's always been. He wasn't booked in a WrestleMania main event, but his name echoed louder than most headliners. That's just who he is, the visionary, the architect, the undisputed workhorse of WWE. The man who carried the weight when others couldn't. The one who showed up when others bailed. And then, just like that, he fell. A simple landing. An awkward step. And a sound. A sickening, snapping sound that only the front row heard, but everyone felt. Seth didn't scream in character. He screamed in pain. The match stopped. The ref threw up the X, trainers rushed. Fans cried. Even Roman Reigns, watching from backstage, is said to have stood up from his chair. The tribal chief. The champion. The apex predator of the WWE, suddenly, concerned? Rollins was helped out, his face buried in his hands. And the headlines wrote themselves. Seth Rollins injured, WrestleMania in doubt. WWE star out indefinitely, knee damage confirmed. The visionary crumbles. But here's the thing about architects. They don't stay broken. They rebuild. And while the world moved on, cheering new stars, crowning new champions, and whispering about Roman's next challenger, Seth was somewhere quiet. Somewhere cold. Somewhere forgotten. Or so it seemed. What you didn't see, what WWE didn't show you, was what happened behind closed doors. The months of rehab. The nights of pain. The days where Seth didn't know if he'd ever return to that ring again. The pain wasn't just in his leg, it was in his identity. His soul. Because who is Seth Rollins if he can't fight? If he can't perform? Who is Seth Rollins if the world stops needing him? The cameras were gone. The chants were silent. And the throne he once chased? It sat under Roman Reigns, untouched, unchallenged. Until now. This isn't about gold anymore. It's not even about redemption. It's about reckoning. Because what happened next will be studied, replayed, and remembered for years to come. April 2025. Monday Night Raw. The main event wraps up. Roman Reigns stands tall in the center of the ring. Solo Sikoa by his side. Paul Heyman clutching that ever-so-deceptive smirk. Another victory. Another night of dominance. And then, blackout, silence, a pause. Then, the unmistakable bass of Burn It Down hits the arena speakers. No announcement. No prior promo. No warning. Seth freaking Rollins is back. The crowd erupts, not just in cheers, but in shock. For weeks, there were rumors. Speculations. Clickbait headlines. But nobody believed he'd return this way, unannounced, unscripted, and staring down the tribal chief like a man possessed. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. Roman Reigns froze. For the first time in years, the head of the table looked uncertain. Seth stood at the top of the ramp. Hands spread. Head tilted. Wearing all black. No wild suits. No over-the-top theatrics. Just a dead stare and a single phrase whispered under his breath, "You remember me?" The tension in that arena was unbearable. Fans didn't breathe. Commentators didn't speak. Even Solo seemed unsure of his next move. Roman took one step forward. And Seth smiled. Then turned. And left. No fight. No speech. Just a declaration. I'm back. Not just back to wrestle. Not just back to entertain. Back to finish what he started. Back to destroy the man who claimed the kingdom Seth helped build. And this is where our story truly begins. Because what's coming next is not just a match. It's a war. Seth Rollins didn't return to reclaim his place. He returned to erase the one who stole it. And Roman Reigns? He may still hold the titles. But for the first time in years, he's not holding the narrative. That's over. Because the architect is back. And this time, he's come to burn it down. Starting with the tribal chief. There are moments in WWE history that don't just change a wrestler's career, they change the trajectory of the entire industry. Bret Hart's concussion. Edge's neck. Daniel Bryan's forced retirement. And now, Seth Rollins' knee. What happened on that fateful night wasn't just another injury, it was a collision between destiny and disaster. A man known for outlasting pain, for rising above punishment, for pushing his body beyond what it should endure. Finally met a wall even he couldn't climb over. And that wall didn't have a name or a face. It had no fists, no music. It was a freak accident, the cruel hand of fate. And it nearly ended the legacy of the man they call the architect. The date was February 11, 2025. The venue, Allstate Arena in Chicago. A house show. Untelevised. Unscripted. Unforgettable. Seth Rollins was booked in a triple threat match against Finn Balor and Shinsuke Nakamura. The crowd was wild. An old-school audience who understood the craft. The kind of fans Rollins thrived on. This wasn't just another match for him. This was his proving ground. His chance to show the world that no matter how many alliances Roman Reigns built, no matter how many betrayals the bloodline orchestrated, Seth Rollins still ran the ring. He was electric that night. Until the moment he wasn't. Midway through the match, Rollins climbed the top rope for his patented frog splash. He soared. 20,000 fans holding their breath. And then he landed. Wrong. His right leg bent awkwardly beneath him. The pop wasn't audible. But the pain was instant. Rollins clutched his knee. Rolled. Screamed. The referee froze. Finn Balor looked back in alarm. Even Nakamura dropped character and ran to the ropes. The match didn't finish. There was no roll-up. No pinfall. No interference. Just a stretcher. Fans recorded the footage on their phones. Clips flooded social media within minutes. One video showed Rollins repeatedly pounding the mat with his fist, yelling something nobody could quite hear, but you didn't need audio. His face told the story. He knew. And so did we. The WWE issued a vague statement the next morning. Seth Rollins suffered a leg injury and is being evaluated by medical staff. More details to come. But insiders were already talking. An ACL tear. Potential meniscus damage. Recovery time? 6 to 9 months, minimum. And just like that, the man who had main event WrestleMania, carried Monday Night Raw through its darkest ratings, and survived more betrayals than anyone on the roster, was out. Silenced. Sidelined. Forgotten. Or so the machine wanted us to believe. Because while the spotlight moved on, to Roman's next challenger, to the Bloodline's crumbling alliances, to Cody Rhodes' slow build, Seth Rollins was in a very different place. He wasn't thinking about WrestleMania. He wasn't thinking about fan chants. He wasn't thinking about merchandise sales. He was thinking about one thing, Roman Reigns. Why? Because as Seth lay in a hospital bed that first night, staring up at fluorescent lights, heavily sedated but wide awake in his mind, there was one thought he couldn't shake. Where was Roman? Not a text. Not a call. Not a tweet. Not even a performative get-well-soon promo on Raw. The man he once called a brother. The man he bled with. The man he turned his back on years ago, but still fought beside when WWE needed saving. Not a word. And that silence was louder than anything else. Injuries are supposed to unite the locker room. Make people check in. Show solidarity. But Seth's phone never rang. No calls from the Bloodline. Not even from Heyman. And as the days passed, and the swelling increased, and the doctors explained the long road ahead, the silence around Seth Rollins turned into isolation. WWE didn't sideline him. They shelved him. He was erased from promos. His name was no longer referenced by commentators. New stars were pushed to fill his slot. Social media moved on. TikTok forgot him. But one person didn't forget. Seth himself. Every morning started the same, a walk with crutches to the rehab room. Hours of physical therapy. Pain so sharp it made him grit his teeth until his jaw locked. And at night, when he sat alone, ice pack strapped to his knees, Becky by his side, his daughter asleep in the next room, he watched Roman. Not just the matches. The promos. The expressions. The manipulations. He watched everything. He watched as Roman slowly turned WWE into his kingdom. As he bent Solo Sikoa into a silent assassin. As he commanded Paul Heyman like a puppet. As he humiliated Jimmy Uso. As he manipulated Jay into walking away. Roman had no challengers left. And that's when Seth realized something terrifying. He was never supposed to come back. The machine had moved on. The Bloodline had swallowed every viable threat. And Seth Rollins? Seth was just another victim. But Rollins wasn't just a wrestler. He's the architect. And architects don't disappear. They rebuild. By May 2025, Rollins had regained partial mobility. He started walking without support. Trainers said his recovery was ahead of schedule. He began lifting again. Sparring. Watching tapes of his past matches. Not for nostalgia, but to find his weaknesses. To learn what broke. And how to never let it break again. Every session pushed him closer to the edge. But the image that pushed him further than any pain was Roman Reigns raising that title with one hand and pointing at the camera with the other. Like a god. Like a man untouchable. Like a man who had no equal left. It was then, in the quiet of his home gym, Rollins made a vow. Not to return. But to ruin. He wouldn't just heal. He would reprogram. He would train in silence, while the world made noise. He would sharpen every mental blade while others celebrated. And when he was ready, he would walk back into Roman's world and set it on fire. By late June, Seth Rollins was walking without a brace. By July, he was sprinting. By August, he was waiting. Not for permission. Not for clearance. But for the moment. The perfect moment to strike. Not in a scheduled return. Not with vignettes or teasers or video packages. But with a stare. And when that moment finally came, on the Monday night where Roman Reigns stood tall after another victory, Rollins stepped back into the spotlight. No fireworks. No warning. Just fire in his eyes. And a very simple message: I'm still here. The injury didn't end him. It rebuilt him. It gave him time to study the enemy. And now, the enemy is about to fall. Because Seth Rollins didn't just survive a knee injury. He survived erasure. And now? He's writing himself back into the script. One burning page at a time. Seth Rollins didn't go to war in a wrestling ring. Not at first. His war began in silence. No cameras. No chants. No pyro. Just the steady hum of fluorescent lights above a hospital bed, the mechanical beeping of a heart monitor, and the echo of every question he couldn't answer. Would he walk right again? Would he wrestle again? Would the fans still care? And most haunting of all, had Roman Reigns already replaced him in the eyes of the world? What began as a physical injury quickly evolved into something far more insidious, a spiritual reckoning. Because Rollins wasn't just dealing with torn ligaments, he was grappling with something no MRI could scan: irrelevance. He had once been the face of WWE. The man who cashed in at WrestleMania. The man who burned bridges and built legacies in the same breath. And yet, here he was, unseen. While Roman Reigns basked in the spotlight, commanding factions like a dictator, Seth was left in the shadows. And for the first time in his life, he couldn't fight back. At least, not yet. The early weeks of recovery were pure torture. The kind that doesn't come with painkillers. It was the stillness. The helplessness. The boredom. Nurses would come in, smile, check his vitals, and walk out without recognizing the man lying in that bed. No one said Seth Rollins. They said Mr. Lopez. And that stung more than anything. Becky tried to hold him together. She brought their daughter in. She played old footage of his matches. She tried to keep him connected to who he was. But the man in the bed didn't feel like a champion. He felt like a ghost. And ghosts don't sell merch. One night, around 2:17 a.m., as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, Rollins heard his daughter cry in the next room. He couldn't get up to help. Couldn't even swing his legs off the bed without a sharp jolt of pain. Becky walked past the door and paused. Seth turned his head slowly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Becky didn't say anything. She just nodded. Not out of frustration, but fear. She knew what he meant. He wasn't apologizing for the injury. He was apologizing for the feeling that he wasn't enough anymore. But in that quiet moment, amid the guilt, the pain, and the silence, something hardened inside him. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. 2 days later, Seth fired his physical therapist. He hired a new one who wasn't afraid to push him. One who didn't care about timelines. One who didn't coddle. From that point on, his recovery wasn't about healing. It was about reclaiming. By week 4, Seth had converted the guest room into a mini gym. Not a flashy one. No logos. No mirrors. Just mats, resistance bands, therapy balls, and silence. He trained in the dark. Worked through the pain. Refused meds. And every single day, after stretching his injured leg until he screamed into a towel, he did the same thing: he watched Roman Reigns. Every match. Every promo. Every backstage segment. Not as a fan. Not as a colleague. As a hunter. He watched how Roman manipulated Solo Sikoa into loyalty. How Paul Heyman whispered lies into his ear. How Jey Uso's face changed week after week, first defiance, then confusion, then silence. He watched how Jimmy crumbled. How Kevin Owens tried and failed to challenge Roman. How Cody came close but didn't finish the job. And every night, Seth took notes. Like a soldier studying the battlefield. He didn't just want to return. He wanted to dismantle. Bit by bit. Mind by mind. Piece by piece. One of the notebooks he filled simply had 2 words on the cover, written in bold black Sharpie, Tribal War. Inside were diagrams. Story arcs. Past promo breakdowns. Quotes. Visual cues. Roman's trigger words. Heyman's tendencies. Solo's reactions. This wasn't rehab. This was war strategy. At one point, Becky found the notebook and read a single line that chilled her to the bone: "Don't fight Roman where he's strong. Fight him where he hides." She looked at Seth, sweat pouring down his face as he attempted his 6th set of one-legged squats. "You're not just coming back to wrestle him, are you?" she asked. Seth didn't look up. "No," he said. "I'm coming back to destroy him." He wasn't exaggerating. In August, while still recovering, Rollins began calling people who owed him favors. People Roman didn't know were still loyal to Seth. Old indie contacts. Ex-WWE talent. Performance center coaches. A handful of NXT standouts looking for a mentor. He made a simple pitch: "Help me take him down. Help me restore what we built." Some said no. Some didn't answer. But a few? A few said yes. Because the truth was, the locker room wasn't united behind Roman. Many were terrified of him. Some envied him. Others tolerated him for the paychecks and TV time. But few respected him. And Seth Rollins was about to weaponize that fact. He began training in secret. A private ring in an undisclosed location in Orlando. No phones. No leaks. Just him and his pain. And every time he hit the ropes, every time he limped across the mat, he thought of Roman holding those titles. Looking smug. Invincible. Untouchable. Until now. Around early September, Seth was cleared for light in-ring work. WWE thought he was still months away. He let them believe that. Let them focus on building toward a Roman vs. Cody 2 storyline. Let them continue ignoring his name on booking sheets. He liked being invisible. Because ghosts can pass through walls. And haunt kings. By mid-September, he could execute a full stomp without hesitation. His strength was back. His speed. His cardio. And most importantly, his anger had shape. It wasn't rage anymore. It was strategy. He wasn't the laughing madman who danced in chaos. He was the storm after the fire. The Seth Rollins who returned would not sing his own theme. He would burn Romans. Quietly. One ember at a time. On the night of his return, Seth stood backstage in all black. No suits. No gold. No color. Just shadows. He could hear Roman's music playing. Could hear the crowd. Could hear Paul Heyman doing what he does best, talking. And for a moment, he hesitated. Not out of fear, this was it, but out of calculation. Everything he had suffered. Everything he had lost. Every moment he was ignored, discarded, disrespected. It all led to this single, silent step onto the ramp. And when the lights dimmed, and the first notes of Burn It Down hit, the arena didn't erupt. It exploded. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It's calculated. And the most dangerous man in the room? Is the one who spent 6 months suffering in silence, only to return. And whisper, "I'm not done yet." The silence wasn't just chilling. It was strategic. For nearly 4 years, Roman Reigns operated in shadows and spotlights alike, mastering the duality of power, 1 minute standing tall as WWE's most decorated champion, the next orchestrating silent chaos backstage. He wasn't just a leader. He was an emperor, presiding over an empire built on intimidation, betrayal, and dominance. But every empire has a turning point. And Roman's had quietly begun to rot from within. On the surface, Roman Reigns still reigned supreme. He walked into arenas with titles on both shoulders, Heyman dragging behind like a priest clinging to a god. His faction, the infamous Bloodline, still looked formidable. Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu, Jimmy Uso, even Tama Tonga at one point, they formed a wall few dared to push against. They called him the tribal chief, but behind closed doors, he was more tyrant than tribal. And that difference? It's where everything started to crumble. In Seth Rollins' absence, Roman wasn't challenged. He wasn't questioned. His matches were methodical, his promos well-crafted, and his enemies, no matter how popular, fell at his feet. Fans still acknowledged him. Commentators still hailed him as untouchable. And Paul Heyman? He spun every doubt into myth, every crack into a crown. But it was all a mask. The real Roman Reigns, the man behind the leather vest and stoic glare, was beginning to feel it. The weight of rule. The burden of paranoia. There were moments, small, almost imperceptible, where the mask slipped. Like that night on SmackDown in early March, when Roman looked over his shoulder not once, not twice, but 3 times during his entrance. Like the confrontation backstage when Solo refused to follow a simple order. Like the stiff stares exchanged with Jacob Fatu after a match where Roman took the spotlight, but didn't do the heavy lifting. And then came the rumors. Whispers that Roman had turned off his phone for days at a time. That Heyman was sending feelers out to younger stars, unsure of where Roman's head was. That Roman had begun skipping rehearsals, arriving late, leaving early. That even Jimmy, loyal, reckless Jimmy, was starting to question the loyalty he'd bled for. But none of this was public. Not yet. To the WWE universe, Roman was still the tribal titan. To those inside the locker room, he was something far more dangerous, unstable. The cracks widened during WrestleMania season. Roman wasn't just facing challengers, he was fending off ghosts. Cody Rhodes, AJ Styles, Kevin Owens, even Sami Zayn, they all had their shots. They all failed. But their losses didn't feel like Roman's victories. They felt like delays. Because the real threat wasn't scheduled for a match. It was recovering in silence. And Roman knew it. Sources say that Roman began watching old Shield footage in private. Matches from 2014, 2015, those early days when he stood side by side with Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose. Videos of chair shots, betrayals, reunions. Even that infamous Money in the Bank cash-in, when Seth stole the title from both Brock and Roman under the stadium lights. He watched it on loop. Not out of nostalgia. Out of anticipation. Because when Seth Rollins got injured, Roman never called. Not because he didn't care. Because he was afraid. Afraid the pain wouldn't keep Seth down. Afraid he'd return, stronger. Smarter. Colder. And that fear festered. Roman Reigns began tightening his grip on the bloodline. Every move had to be approved. Every segment rehearsed. Every word from Heyman double-checked. He didn't trust Jimmy. He didn't trust Solo. He especially didn't trust Jacob Fatu, who had already shown signs of independence. Roman tried to consolidate power. But power, once stretched too thin, begins to snap. At one Raw taping in June, Roman allegedly berated Solo backstage in front of staff. "If you ever hesitate in front of the cameras again, I'll leave your legacy in the dirt," he reportedly said. Solo didn't respond. He just stared. Expressionless. Like he'd heard enough. Heyman, always the weaver of chaos, did his best to smooth things over. He made public comments about Roman's unshakable vision, called the Bloodline a family of warriors, and praised Reigns as the most mentally disciplined champion in sports entertainment. But Heyman's eyes? They were tired. Even he knew this wasn't sustainable. Roman had ruled too long. Dominated too thoroughly. Burned too many bridges. And in his need for control, he forgot that power comes with cost. There was a moment, just before Rollins returned, that defined the beginning of Roman's unraveling. It happened backstage during SmackDown. Roman, standing in front of a mirror, full gear on, titles strapped to each shoulder. He wasn't looking at himself. He was talking to himself. "You built this," he whispered. "Don't let him take it." The camera didn't catch it. A stagehand did. He reported it. And by the following week, the whispers were louder than ever. Roman Reigns wasn't the calm, calculated ruler anymore. He was paranoid. Distracted. Haunted. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, behind the noise and applause and gold, he knew Seth Rollins wasn't finished. And when that moment finally came, when "Burn It Down" echoed through the arena and every head snapped toward the ramp, Roman didn't look shocked. He looked ready. Not for a fight, but for a reckoning. Because Roman Reigns isn't afraid of a man. He's afraid of a man with nothing left to lose. And that's who walked out on Raw that night. A man who lost his titles, his time, his relevance, his trust. A man who had been erased. And was now coming back to erase the one who did it. Roman Reigns ruled a kingdom. But Seth Rollins built the foundation. And now? The architect is returning. To tear it down. Brick by brick. Match by match. Mind by mind. And Roman? He can feel the ground shaking. Because his empire hasn't just grown cold. It's starting to collapse.